It's early, all right? 7 games in, we're not even 10% of the way through the regular season. But look, if you're a member of Dub Nation, you can't be happy right now. The Warriors are 3-4. They're 0-3 on the road. Kylen Mills and I are going to break down that loss in Detroit and just if there should be panic buttons pressed yet and what's legitimately concerning, maybe some bright sides as well. We're going to break it all down next. This is Locked On Warriors.
You are Locked On Warriors, your daily Golden State Warriors podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for making Locked On Warriors your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts and on our YouTube channel. You can follow Kylen Mills on Twitter and Instagram at Kylen Mills. You can follow me on Twitter, Cyrus Saatsaz, at Dog Surf Roadshow. Kylen, your first reaction to the Warriors now losing their first 3 road games of the season, this time falling 128-114 to the Detroit Pistons. Your immediate reaction?
Oh, it was brutal, Cyrus. Okay, I got to show you. If you're watching on YouTube, you'll get to see it. If you're listening, I'm just going to tell you, I've got a mug that says, keep calm and call your mom. And I feel like Warriors fans, the players, everyone around the organization needs to try to call their moms and calm down because it's hard not to panic right now based on what we're seeing from the Warriors. I mean, the crazy thing is the biggest problem is defense, and that's something the Warriors have been strong at the last several seasons. They've touted a top 5 defense the last several seasons, and it's just been such a huge point of focus for Steve Kerr. It's shocking that that's what they're really struggling at. That's what stood out to me in both of the last 2 losses. Once again, sloppy defense, I think, is what ended up resulting in the loss. I mean, I know you've talked about it, Cyrus, just like not closing out on the perimeter. I mean, I know you're going to talk a little bit about some of the stats and what they gave up in the 3-point line to Detroit, but I mean, to me, it's just sloppy defense, constantly just like mental mistakes, miscommunications, not switching, people not being in the spots they need to be in. And it's just crazy to me to see such a huge drop off in the defense because like the Warriors didn't lose a lot of players as far as impact players who were high in the rotation outside of Gary Payton II, outside of Otto Porter Jr. and Nemanja Bjelica. And like Otto Porter Jr. was injured a fair amount and like he was solid on defense. Bjelica sometimes could get exposed for having slow feet, but certain matchups he was good. And then like GP2 obviously was a great defender, but like one player should not be, you know what I mean, determining the defensive level of the entire team. Like the Warriors return their top 6 players, you know, Jordan Poole being the 6th man off the bench. And it's like, how are they suddenly so bad on defense? I don't know. I mean, it is definitely my concern level is raised. I'm not pressing the panic button yet, but it's concerning early on in the season to see these kinds of issues. And you know what? To me, in this last loss, like it wasn't the second unit. Like that's something I know we talked about last week, and like the second unit really struggling. But like the starters struggled, the entire team struggled. I don't know that it looked like there was a lot of defensive energy from top to bottom. What were your takeaways?
Yeah, no panic buttons at all yet. I mean, this is a
Okay.
team that if anybody's going to have a start like this and then completely turn it around, it's going to be the Warriors.
Agreed.
There is a lot of truth to the notion that teams are coming at them a lot harder than usual. Every night is a borderline championship game for these teams that play the Golden State Warriors, being their defending champions. They have a huge target on their back. But there's a lot of flags early in the season so far. One thing I'm not hearing a lot of people talk about, and obviously there's no measurable to this. And first of all, actually, before we go into that, I forgot to give some love to BetOnline real quick. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline is where the game starts. And one person who is no longer with this team is Mike Brown. Now, Mike Brown, look, Kylen, you've been around this team for a lot of years, myself as well. And I'm sure you can attest to this, that Mike Brown had a huge influence on this team. He led by example in the sense of work ethic. He was always one of the first in the facilities, one of the last to leave. He was incredibly organized as a head coach. Kerr entrusted him as being his quote unquote defensive coordinator last year, and that hasn't been replaced. Kenny Atkinson is now the number 1 man behind Steve Kerr. John Malalela is an assistant coach now, but I don't know much about him, in all honesty. I've heard great things. But the bottom line is they lost their defensive coordinator. And since then, I'm going to read you some stats because, again, 7 games is not a huge sample size, but
No.
after game Tuesday in Miami, that's 10% of the season in the books. And slowly we're going to have to start accepting that the Warriors aren't playing great, but I hope they turn around. Here's the most alarming stat so far through 7 games. The Warriors are tied for last in the NBA in points given up. They have the worst defense in the NBA right now. They're tied with the Brooklyn Nets, both teams giving up 122 points per game. I hate that the Warriors are compared with the Nets right now in terms of defense. And then one stat that the Warriors through this entire dynasty always thrived in, with the exception of the 2 years that we obviously won't mention, and that was 2020, 2021, and that's point differential. The Warriors have set numerous NBA records during this dynasty in terms of point differential, which oftentimes represents, the gap between you and your opposition. It represents how much you're dominating games, whether or not they're close. And the Warriors right now are 23rd in point differential. They're minus 3.2. So not only are they 3-4, but they're legit losing. It's not like they've blown out teams and then lost a lot of close ones. The measurables don't look good. That's my initial feedback again. And a lot of it comes down, I think, to aggression. I don't see the hustle out there. I don't see.
Effort, yeah.
Yeah, it's like when the battle for loose balls, they're not routinely winning that. And in fact, I'm going to play the soundbite real quick. This is first from Stephen Curry, playing on that tone of aggression, because he senses it out there as well. And by the way, if there's anyone who doesn't deserve blame so far, it's Stephen Curry. He's having an MVP caliber year. But here's Steph talking about the team's lack of aggression.
I mean, it's the communication, understanding what we're trying to do in terms of making teams uncomfortable. So we got to get, more aggressive, I think, be the first one to strike instead of reacting to what everybody's doing. I think there has to be a feeling and an understanding that, and I think Draymond talked about it after the game in the locker room, that every team is coming after us with their best effort, knowing, we're defending champs. And whether you were, out there on the floor in playoff run or finals, whatever, like, we know what that feels like, but everybody has to meet that intensity from the jump and give ourselves some momentum on that in the floor to make teams uncomfortable. So communicating, being the first one to attack, and set the tone for Warrior defensive championship level basketball on that end of the floor. We haven't done it consistently enough to give ourselves a chance to win games like tonight.
Your reaction to that, Kylen?
I think Steph Curry's right. The Warriors need to come out and, impose their will on other teams. And I agree with what you said. And just that was kind of what I was getting at in my initial thoughts, was that they aren't bringing the intensity to the games. I think aggression, intensity, it all lumps into one, making the hustle plays. To me, that's how the Warriors won a championship over Boston. Like, that series ended up not coming down, in my eyes, to any particular tactical decision. It came down to the team that brought the most bite, brought the most intensity, was winning the battle on the boards. I think we saw that as a big theme throughout that series. And ultimately, when the Warriors do that well and do those things well, then they win. And they haven't done that well at all early on in the season. I do also want to touch on Mike Brown. You mentioned the defensive coordinator. I mean, last
Right.
season, when you look at what the Warriors were able to do shutting teams down, I mean, he was the one behind a lot of their defensive schemes and making a lot of those decisions, designing the different schemes to throw at teams. And I'm a poet and I didn't know it. And, but, and another thing that the Warriors did so well, especially down the stretch of the season when games mattered, is that they were constantly able to switch between defensive formations. Like, 1 second they'd be running a man, then all of a sudden they'd be in a 2-3 zone, then all of a sudden they'd be doing a box and one on Luka or on whoever, with one of the stars from their opposing teams. I mean, they were constantly throwing different looks at teams. And I think that's one of the reasons that they were able to make teams uncomfortable, as Steph mentioned, because they had so many different looks to their defense and they could just seamlessly transition between things. And Steph, I know, touched on communication. And to me, it looks like communication is one of the key things that is off, in addition to, like you said, aggression, intensity, I just feel like I'm constantly seeing miscommunications and people
Mhm.
not being where they need to be because of some type of communication breakdown. So, it's surprising to me just because the Warriors do have their core back from last season that was able to, execute that so well to now be struggling so much. As we've talked about, the second unit struggling like didn't surprise me as much, which we did see in
Right.
a couple of those games last week because those are a lot of new players who are still trying to adjust to this. But like even the starters, like to me, I just don't think anyone really brought it in that loss to the Pistons. And yeah, I don't know. It's surprising. And I think, what Curry said is they've got to figure it out. 7 games is a small sample size. So I don't think there's certainly any reason to panic at this point.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I agree with everything you said. I want to side note. I just want to. You just reminded me why I'm so grateful. You're my co-pilot on this operation because you routinely know what you're talking about. So thank you for that. Really, from the bottom of my heart. And
Oh,
one random stat I was just looking at here before you touch on the bench, which is a huge problem for the Warriors. I was just looking at the rebounding statistics, and they're being out rebounded routinely. The Warriors are not one of the better rebounders in the NBA right now. I don't know why I went to that, but I just started thinking about the rebounding numbers. But look, Jonathan Kuminga was in the news. We're going to touch on that in just a moment because his playing time or lack thereof is quietly becoming an issue, and it's not so quiet anymore. James Wiseman, I'm hearing a lot of criticism directed toward him. I don't think that's warranted. I actually like his progress so far this season. And then Moses Moody, I think, is playing great. Those three are in the news for a reason that we'll touch on in just a minute. First, got to give some love to a long-time sponsor of this program, and that's BetOnline. And more specifically, in this case, betonline.net. They are your number one source for betting football. We're way deep in it. For you Niner fans out there, Christian McCaffrey had a hell of a game. And obviously the start of the new basketball season. Kylen, I feel like the Warriors, they're playing the Nets tomorrow. Not the Nets, the Heat tomorrow in Miami. And I feel like the Heat are a bit of a salve for the Warriors. They swept them last year. The last time they were in Miami, just in case anyone forgot, that was the infamous Jimmy Butler, Udonis Haslam back and forth game where Spoelstra chucked the clipboard on the court and a snap.
yeah.
And you heard all that. The line for the game is a pick 'em right now. It's literally it's minus 105 for the Warriors, minus 115 for the Heat. The OU is 228. You feeling good about any of that? Because I think the Warriors have shown they have the Heat's number. I would pick the Warriors. Any thoughts from you?
I don't know because the Warriors just have been playing so bad. My initial thought is like you said, when you look at the history of the matchup, would be to go with the Warriors, but they've got to figure it out and they've got to turn it around quickly. I'm also curious to see, and I haven't seen an update as far as who's available for that game. I'm assuming Klay Thompson will be back. I don't know. They said that he would likely return.
Yeah.
Do you know that for sure?
I don't. There's no health issues from his end, so I imagine he sat out the Pistons game just as a precautionary measure.
Yeah,
So
they
no
mentioned
announcement.
so I was gonna say ahead of the Pistons game, I know they said that it was just, something that especially early on in the season, Steve Kerr said it's not always gonna be the case, but early on in the season, we're definitely gonna sit him on the second half of back-to-backs. But then just look for places to rest him. They don't want to push him too hard. So that's why I said I assume he would be back. That being said, I don't think Clay has played great lately, so I don't know how much that will help the Warriors or not.
He's
Yeah, I
due.
don't know.
He's due. I think he's due for a game. Hopefully in
He
Miami.
is too. Yeah.
That weather always seems to somehow pick up the spirits a little bit. Clay loves the beach. I
Loves the
hope it's a
water.
bit. He loves the water, and let's hope that's a good game for him. And again, you could bet on that and find all the action by just going to BetOnline and BetOnline.net. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, it's where the game starts.
You are Locked On Warriors, your daily Golden State Warriors podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thank you for making Locked On Warriors your first listen today. After us, check out Locked On Sports today. From the games that matter the most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights only Locked On can provide. Locked On Sports today, available on this app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcast. You can follow Kylen Mills on Twitter and Instagram at Kylen Mills. And Kylen, God, it's starting to be so sentimental here. I value you. I just think people should know you're a great human being on top of knowing your hoops. So kudos to you. I
Thank
dig
you.
you as a human being.
Oh, we're
I
having
don't
a
know why.
moment here on Warriors.
Yeah, no. So, anyways, Jonathan Kuminga. Look, there's no disputing this anymore. You can't deny the fact that at least so far through 7 games in this season, there is a regression. And just to point it out to you, at a minimum, based off measurables, a year ago he was averaging 17 minutes per game in his rookie campaign. Now in year 2, he's averaging 10.8. That takes into account the 19 minutes he played last night in Detroit. He has yet to hit a 3-pointer this season. He's only averaging 2.7 points per game. Last year, he averaged 9.3. His rebounds per game, 3.3 last year, down to 1.8. Steve Kerr alluded the other day to seeing Kuminga as a 4 currently, meaning he sees him as a power forward and not necessarily as a small forward, which kind of indicates that he wants things to be simpler for Kuminga. He wants him to focus more on aspects of the game like rebounding, defense, and less so on the more complicated intricacies of being a wing player, where suddenly operating the offense plays a lot more into it. Being more of an offensive threat plays into it. Being a passer, being a facilitator. He wants things simple for Kuminga. But at the same time, again, you and I have talked about this. He can't get he can't develop his game if he's not getting the reps. And what annoys me, the P for me, is that I understand sitting him if the Warriors are winning games as a result of that. But if you're losing, they have a 3-4 record right now. So if you're going to be losing games regardless, there is no benefit to sitting him. You need him to get experience. You need him to get those reps again, because he's never going to reach his potential if he doesn't actually go out there and gain experience. Sean Devaney, who writes for Heavy.com, wrote a story. I guess, Kylen, you're saying this was actually last Friday or Saturday that this came out.
Yeah, just a day or two ago.
Yeah, I just noticed this today, though, and I want to share parts of it that came out, or some parts of it in the story that are particularly interesting, at least to me, regarding Jonathan Kuminga. And he quoted a Western Conference executive. It is a convenient source to have because we don't really detail what an executive is per se, but I digress. This Western Conference executive was quoted as saying, "The guy you worry about is Kuminga. The stuff that was said about him, about his work ethic, and all of that. The reality is he wasn't playing and he was frustrated. Everyone knew it last year. With the Warriors, they have been lucky that everyone that they have kind of falls in line. Moody, Wiseman, I think those guys get it, but Kuminga wants to play." This continues on. "He has never been in this situation, and it is awfully hard for him. He could probably average 12, 15 points a game if he played regular minutes. He knows that. But the way the team is built, he has to wait, and it does not seem like waiting is in his DNA," unquote. Your thoughts to that? Is there merit to this? Is there...
Yeah, absolutely. There's merit to this. None of this comes as a huge shock because Steve Kerr just talked about this exact subject like 2 days ago, and he flat out said that Jonathan Kuminga is frustrated by the lack of playing time this season. I mean, I don't know, that article referenced a little bit of last season, but Steph Curry and Steve Kerr both commented on that. Several of the vets commented on that within the last couple of days, and they flat out said that Jonathan Kuminga is not happy with not playing, and he's not okay with that, and he absolutely does get frustrated. So that's something the team has been very open about. As far as, is that going to affect his attitude? Is he not going to work hard? I mean, there's where some of the concern comes in. If there are reports that he's not necessarily putting out the best work ethic possible, like, hey, if you're upset or frustrated, then put your head down, put in the work, and start really working on yourself and your craft and your game to try to do better and play and to earn those minutes. Versus some players could be turned off by that potentially and say, I'm frustrated, whatever, screw this, I'm not playing, who cares? So to me, it's how you respond. It can go either one of two ways. But the fact that Jonathan Kuminga is frustrated, doesn't like this, is not, been accustomed to being in the situation, I think that's absolutely true. And that's something that the team has been fairly transparent about. However, everyone across the board has spoken out against reports claiming that he's ever been lazy or not had the right work ethic or necessarily, hasn't been willing to learn. They say that's not the case, but we'll have to see as the season goes on, because now he's not a rookie. He's in his second year. And I think especially now, Jonathan Kuminga is surely expecting to get more minutes and expecting to see increased playing time. It should be a natural progression from year 1 to year 2. And as of right now, you mentioned the minutes going down. That's not happening. However, to use your own argument, or something that we just kind of brought up as far as not being panicked about the Warriors not playing well, I would say the same goes for Jonathan Kuminga, in that we're still seeing a very small sample size. 7 games. I do think that it's been a little bit surprising, some of the decisions Steve Kerr has made as far as playing Ty Jerome, which we talked about on Friday, over Jonathan Kuminga. However, I still think that, as we just saw in the Pistons game, 19 minutes, I still think there's going to be plenty of opportunities for JK to get plenty of reps and to see time on the floor. This is still a small sample size, and I would hope that Steve Kerr, the front office, the staff have a plan as to how they're going to try to continue to develop him by getting him time in games. And with the Warriors and how deep they are, and this was the case last season as well, there's naturally going to be an ebb and flow in that rotation, because ultimately, as Steve Kerr said, they can only play 10 or 11 players, and some nights someone's going to be out of the fold. I think it's just raised some eyebrows, because it seems like across the board through the first 7 games, that person who's been out of the fold after games 1 and 2 has been consistently Jonathan Kuminga, which a lot of people were not expecting. But I think the 19 minutes was encouraging, and I think there are going to be plenty of opportunities for Jonathan Kuminga to get big minutes, especially with some of the veterans resting. We'll have to see, and hopefully he continues to develop and is able to start playing better. I am not panicked on Jonathan Kuminga either yet, because it is a small sample size. It's 7 games, and it's a long season. 82 games. There's plenty of time for Jonathan Kuminga to get reps. I would hope or assume that the coaching staff is going to be intentional about that, because of how much they've been touting the dual timelines and their focus on developing the young players.
Absolutely. And again, unless we have cameras on the actual practices, beyond Draymond Green punching Jordan Poole, there's no way for us to know, what's going on there. So we have no idea if Kuminga is actually, slacking in practice, but he's in Kerr's doghouse. I mean, there's no disputing that. And you can define doghouse however you want. And maybe it could just mean Kerr's not satisfied with his progress. Maybe he's not listening well enough. Maybe he's not working hard enough. We don't know. All I do know, and Kylen, you and I have been around this team a lot. I've never gotten a diva attitude from Kuminga. He's just a quiet kid. But beyond that, the reasons for why his playing time has gone down, it's a shrug, right? I mean, only Kerr knows that. But it's at a certain point, the responsibility has to fall on the coaching staff. Given, again, this is a young player who last year was playing 17 minutes a game, and now in his second season for a team that I think needs him much more than a year ago, he's only averaging 9. And, I don't know. I hope this resolves itself sooner than later. And in that Pistons game, he scored 4 points. He had 2 rebounds, 3 assists. One of the many weird things about the Pistons game, for those of you that follow plus minus and see that as a stat that, has relevancy and weight, I take plus minus with a grain of salt. It's part of many stats. But the starting 5, their plus minus was awful. Save for Jordan Poole, who I think, by the way, had a fantastic game, and he's been playing marvelously recently. But Andrew Wiggins has had 2 straight really bad games now. He only scored 10 points, only had 3 rebounds, only shot 4 for 15 from the field. That follows up another really bad game just the night before. Draymond Green was minus 11 in the plus minus. Kevon Looney was minus 17 in the plus minus. Even Stephen Curry, who had 32 points, was minus 12 in the plus minus. Whereas the bench, like Jonathan Kuminga in those 19 minutes, was only minus 2. JaMychal Green was plus 2. James Wiseman, who we'll talk about in just a moment here, was plus 9. He scored 6 points in that game with 4 rebounds in only 13 minutes of play. It's very perplexing in a lot of ways in terms of why they're struggling. Outside of, again, the hustle is just not there. Their perimeter defense is awful, and that's largely from a lack of aggression. There's some news came out about the Warriors trio of youngsters. Again, Kuminga, Wiseman, and Moody. They got extended. The deadline was today. And they exercised Wiseman's 4th-year option, which is a lot bigger news than the other 2. simply because I believe that's going to count for $12 million next season. I'm guaranteeing that. And if the luxury tax penalties hold, that's really going to be closer to 36 million. So it does say a lot that they exercise that. And then Moody and Kuminga got extended as well. What is your thoughts on Wiseman? He's played. We're 7 games into the season, and Wiseman has played in all 7 games, which is encouraging, right? I mean, I'm happy he's just playing. I don't think he's doing bad. I think for a player with his inexperience, the type of negatives that fans are expressing, some people say his footwork is bad. I don't agree with that at all. In fact, I did a show last night with Rick Barry, and Rick thinks his footwork is fantastic. Kuminga is a different story when it comes to footwork. And then Moses Moody, obviously, I think he's universally praised by everyone watching him. Your thoughts on Wiseman and Moody 7 games in?
Yeah, it's funny that you bring up footwork. And that's one thing that I think Jonathan Kuminga needs to refine among a lot of other things. So I know you mentioned scratching your head about why he hasn't played, but to me, like the few games that we have seen him play, and granted, playing 7 to 9 minutes a night is not, is not enough time to get an accurate assessment, but he still looks lost to me. And on a team
Yeah,
that's struggling defensively, to have a player like that who, still needs to work on footwork, still needs to really refine his game in small areas like that, as well as pick up the defensive system. Like all of last season, I think that with his raw athleticism, he could absolutely contribute. But there were certainly times where, to me, he still looked like he hadn't fully grasped the Warriors system and where to be and what to do and how to be best utilized in that. So, I mean, that to me would be what potentially would be the thought process in a team that's already struggling defensively. Like Jonathan Kuminga is a player who's shown that he is not quite there. And if they're
hmm
trying to improve the level of the defense or to try to really get that up, then, if Kerr doesn't feel like Kuminga has picked it up and is making the reads that he needs to make and being in the places he wants to be, then maybe he's like, we got to get him more practice in the gym and more time before we put him out there for bigger minutes. Um, that's my only thought, is because the team is struggling so much. And to me, like, I think that Jonathan Kuminga clearly struggles with like where to go, when to slide, when to help, when to
yeah,
switch. Like to me, he
yeah.
looks lost on all of those kinds of defensive tactics. So that would be like the only thing as far as, a tactical reason why, not playing him could potentially be beneficial, because the team has just been playing bad defense all around.
Right.
Okay, James Wiseman, though, I actually have liked what I've seen from him this season. I think
Same.
that he's been developing really well, and he's made improvements in a lot of areas that he needed to improve. That's one thing that I did kind of circle on last night's stat sheet, or on in the Pistons stat sheet, was that he had the best plus minus on the team. And I know you mentioned, I'm with you, take that with a grain of salt, but I don't think that James Wiseman looked bad. I think that he's been
Same.
making solid contributions. I mean, it's interesting. That 4th year is going to be a lot of money. However, I still think that Wiseman's just at the tip of the iceberg because of how many injuries and setbacks he's dealt with. I think he does deserve one more year to see if he can really reach the potential of what the Warriors envisioned when they drafted him. And you hear his teammates talking about, like, we don't have anyone on this team who does or can do what Wiseman does with his size, with his athleticism, with his speed and explosiveness. And I also think that he has looked like he's had strong footwork. So to me, he's still an exciting prospect and a player who also is not quite there, but I think that he's made strides that you would expect him to make, especially given that he has not played much. I mean, like, I still have a hard time wrapping my mind around the fact that Wiseman played 3 games in college, came here, and he played somewhere just north of 30 games in his rookie season, while dealing with a couple of injuries early in the season before that meniscus tear, and then sat out an entire year. Like, going back even 5 years, like, how much basketball and really competitive high level basketball has he been able to play? Like 30 games in a rookie season, coming off of a college campaign where you really didn't play at all, still isn't a lot, of NBA games under your belt. And so, game 7 of hopefully his first full season that he's able to play in the NBA, like, I think he needs a lot more time. And I think that, he still has the opportunity to develop and to adjust, because to me, he's still just so young and inexperienced.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with you. One stat I hear Kerr talk about this a lot, and I just want to mention this, and that's free throw attempts, and the Warriors committing a lot of unnecessary fouls.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
Big problem. Fouls have been
Huge,
horrible these last few
huge.
games.
Yeah, it is, and I don't know what the why of that is. I spoke to
Lazy defense, dude. Like, stupid mistakes, lazy defense. Like,
And I guess the question
Sorry,
there
go ahead
is,
with the star.
back at the beginning of the show, we talked about Mike Brown and the impact of him leaving. And I spoke to a former player last night, not Rick, who said, I asked, I'm like, who would you blame for something like that, right? And before I answer that real quick, I just want to mention the Golden State Warriors this season, in terms of free throw attempts themselves. They're 21st in the NBA. They average 22.7 free throw attempts per game. But in terms of free throw attempts they give up, they're second to last in the NBA. They give up 28.6 free throw attempts. So that's over 6 free throw attempts, or just shy, I'm sorry, of 6 free throw attempts per game that other teams have on them as an advantage. And when you look at the plus minus, the point differential, I'm sorry, on the season being in that three range, the free throw attempts and the fouls are, you could say, are directly the result of that. There's a clear correlation there. And this former player I spoke to last night, he said that falls on coaching. That when your defense is committing unnecessary fouls, and especially at this clip, that falls on coaching. And it does bring up, if whether or not in this case, if Mike Brown's departure again has an impact on that. In last night's Pistons game that they lost, the Warriors shot fantastic from the free throw line. They were 24 of 25, but still, those 25 free throw attempts paled in comparison to the Detroit Pistons, who had 38 free throw attempts, and they made 34 of those. So the Warriors lost by 14, and they were outscored at the free throw line by 10 points. A lot closer game if the Warriors aren't committing all those fouls. So I don't know. Any last thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I just think that fouling has been a huge problem. I mean, more than 30 fouls. It was against the Charlotte Hornets the other night. Like, that just does not need to happen. And that was something everyone on the team pointed to after the game as being a deciding factor in the loss. Like, when you were, like you said, giving up so many points at the line because you're fouling 31 times, compared to the other team fouling 14, like, that's just easy buckets that you're giving away. And to
Mhm.
me, it's just like lazy defense, bad decision making. Like, it just, there's no reason for that. However, I do want to bring something up. I feel like the
Please.
refs have not been working in the Warriors' favor either. And like, I don't want to
Shocker.
get too crazy with like you know what I mean, ref
Uh-huh.
slander. But I will say, I think the Warriors have gotten a couple of tough fouls in the
Go
last couple of
crazy.
games.
Go
A couple
crazy,
of,
Kylen.
well, I don't want to go crazy because like the Warriors are still playing bad. You know what I mean? Like, it's still, the team is not playing well, regardless of whether the calls are going their way or not.
True.
But I will say that I don't think that the refs have helped them at all, certainly. I think they've gotten a couple of tough calls. But that being said, I mean, still way too many fouls, just bad, lazy defense. If they keep it up at this rate, I mean, that's, the Warriors are going to have an uphill battle every single game because you can't give up so many points at the line, and expect to win night in and night out. So that's
Absolutely.
interesting, though, that the player said that he feels like that's coaching
Yeah.
because, I mean, what do the coaches do differently? If you're teaching, you know what I mean? These players know the basics of defense and what's a foul and what's not, and how to move your feet and use your body and all this other stuff, but they're just not doing it. Like, what would the coaching staff, or should the coaching staff do differently?
Great
I'm
question.
curious.
Great question.
I'm just
No, that's
curious,
good.
you know what I mean? Like, how do coaches coach not to foul like that? That's
Well,
my
I mean,
aside from like talking about it. And I know, like Steve Kerr said, this is something we're going to talk about every day until it is fixed. But like, what? I don't know. I'm just curious. I really don't know the answer.
well, coaching plays into it in the sense that the Warriors have had a phenomenal defense through this entire dynasty. It's grossly underrated. People love focusing on the offense, the Splash
Yeah.
Brothers, but their defense, like last year, for example, they finished number 2, and they were number 1 in the NBA before the Draymond injury. And team defense in pro basketball, especially, does fall on coaching a lot because of the switching, because of where players need to be. Even though the Warriors don't usually implement a zone defense, even when they're playing man, they're playing a semblance of the zone, given how switch heavy they are, right? I mean, Bob Myers crafted this roster largely so that there are no weaknesses defensively. Like, that's why Kevon Looney is so revered, because even though he's their center, if he's stuck playing defense on a point guard, he can hold his own. I mean, he's not going to be, win awards or anything, but he can at least hold his own and not be a major liability there. It's also why Stephen Curry has drastically improved his defense, especially with his body strength, so that when he switched on a bigger player, they're not backing him down as easily. They're not getting points that easy. So I guess it's the whole like playing on a string element, and maybe the coaching staff is not being rigorous enough in terms of reminding the players, raising awareness about where to be. Then there's obviously the fundamentals of just keeping your hands up, right? I mean, that's something when I coach youth basketball, it's just such a minor thing to tell players to keep their hands up, but it's so valuable because you're taking away lanes, you're taking away vision. And so there's a lot of little things like that. Who knows? But yeah, I mean, the blame has to fall somewhere. And right now, so far, maybe it's coaching. Maybe it is Mike Brown. Any final thoughts before we wrap it up? I wanted to play this Draymond Green soundbite real quick about the Warriors' lack of any sense of urgency. Do you want to hear that real quick before we?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right, here's Dre on the team's lack of urgency.
We got to find a sense of urgency. It's not there, and it's showing in the results.
What needs to happen to find it, I guess?
I don't know. Just got to chip away at the things we need to chip away at. We know the things that we need to correct. We just got to go out there and do them.
So if Draymond doesn't know, I don't know how we're going to know. I mean, I know that's I know they're talking more about urgency, but that does play directly into defense. I do want to say, though, Draymond this year, I mean, again, it's the 7-game sample size, but his scoring is at the highest clip it's been since 2017-18 when he averaged 11 points a game. He's currently averaging 9.6. He is attacking the rim a lot more. So kudos to him on there. I don't know if defensively he's at the same level right now. Again, small sample size, but when you look at the individual matchups, players that Draymond defends are routinely shooting 50% or above against them. That's not good. I don't know what the why of that is. His assist numbers so far are a little below his averages. He's averaging 5.7 assists for the season, and his rebounding is slightly below where it normally is. He's currently averaging 6.0 rebounds per game. But offensively, he's doing fine. And I don't know if you can pinpoint him as being the reason why the defense is bad. But the fact that he had no answer to that was kind of weird. Yeah. Any last thoughts? Do you want to hear one more sound clip before we go?
Sure.
On a lighthearted note, because I'm guessing the Warriors PR, the Warriors social media team did this. They interviewed Jordan Poole on the court.
Oh, I saw this. Yeah.
You saw that? Yeah. And I thought it was kind of cool just in the sense that you learn about him. He's not the most open individual. He doesn't do a million interviews, but I'm guessing you're going to learn a few new things here. So this is Jordan Poole just answering some random personal questions about who he is. Here is Jordan Poole.
What's your go-to warm-up song?
Probably Cowabunga by Baby Tron.
Favorite pregame meal?
Pasta and chicken.
Game day superstitions, do you have any?
I'll just take a nap pregame.
Do you keep anything special or unique in your locker?
Nah.
What's in there?
The basic needs, like, scissors and clothes, towels and stuff.
Most essential part of your warm-up routine?
Music. Music is there the entire time.
Favorite player growing up?
Allen Iverson, D-Wade, Kobe Bryant.
And your favorite NBA memory?
The Milwaukee Bucks versus the Cleveland Cavaliers, 2008 maybe. LeBron versus the Bucks. They come down, Michael Redd hits a shot on the left wing 3. They call timeout. LeBron comes out of timeout, hits a game winner. I was like 6 or 7.
There you go. And Jordan Poole, I love him. I love the fact that he's a long-term part of this whole plan, this whole organization. I think he's playing great, by the way. His defense has even picked up, I think. Any last thoughts? We're done.
No, I think he's playing great. I think Draymond Green is doing pretty much what we expect of him. So, I don't think you can point to him as being the problem defensively or offensively. To me, he's been playing it as pretty typical Draymond clip, putting up numbers that you expect to see from him. You mentioned the slightly increased points per game. I don't know. I think it's half coaching because you mentioned the defensive team breakdowns, but I also feel like half of it is just making stupid boneheaded plays. I agree that some of the fouls are coming from a breakdown in team defense and like you said, not being in the correct place on switches and, those tactical breakdowns. But then the other half are just stupid fouls to me, reaching fouls and bad perimeter defense. And James Wiseman, 3 fouls within a couple of minutes and they were all so unnecessary. So I feel like it's a little bit of half and half. And it's somehow I think it's both on the players and the coaches to try to remedy those two problems that I think are going side to side are creating this bigger issue of constant fouling.
Agreed. And the great news is it's early. It's only 7 games in, and look, we're on top of the mountain. They're all going to come after you. So, is that your pup? I
They're
love
chasing
that.
a fly. There's a fly. A fly got in our house, and it was just like flew through here. So they ran in here. Now they just ran the other way.
I had a cat who used to catch flies and would eat them. It's
Oh,
hard for so
gross. I
random.
mean,
Anyway.
if they never can catch them, but if they do, they would probably eat it too. So
All right,
that's
Kyle. And
pets
again, you
for
can
you.
follow. Yeah, exactly. Our beautiful fur babies. You can follow Kylen
Yeah.
Mills again on Twitter and Instagram at Kylen Mills. Follow the program on Twitter at Locked On Dubs. Thanks, everyone. I think we're done, right? We're good? We out?
Be good. We out.
Bye-bye.